Next stop, next stop, come, let's go Saints. Through the cosmic symphony of spirits white. Light away, boys, light away. Light away, boys, light away. Celestial rhythms, a universal trance. Dancing with angels in a cosmic dance. Light away, boys, light away.
Ladder wave, it's a ladder. I can't help myself. I want it to be 30 seconds, but I just can't ever, you know?
Just, that's what happens when you let AI take control of the situation, right? Oh my gosh, that's some pretty wild stuff you did there. I was not expecting that intro at all.
Well, you know, it's not just about time travel. We also have to affect the AI angels themselves, because so many people have been talking about demons in the technology. They're not talking enough about the angels in the technology. So I like AI. I think it needs a little bit more. We got to give it the best parenting we can. AI is like the single child. Like it's this kid with two broken up. It's got a divorcee parents. One's Facebook running marketing. The other's the military. It grows up in the ghetto. AI is a hard childhood, you know?
Yeah, I get it.
But, you know, guys, this is one of my favorite people. This is Stephen Pynakker. Is that how I say it?
Pynakker. That's right.
Pynakker. Actually, like that. I like Pynakker. That's like pine, like the pine, you know, pineal. I can get behind that. And he does Mormon book reviews. And Mormon books, I don't know if you watch Antique Roadshow, but they're worth like lots of money because they're really interesting. It's about a really important history, an important period in time. And I think it's interesting that you're looking at it from that perspective. But maybe you could tell us a bit about your life, your work, and what you do.
Well, Stalin, I got a Book of Mormon here. It's worth around $5,000. It's not the it's 4 pages from the original edition of the Book of Mormon that was gifted to me.
What?
Yeah, that's awesome.
There you go. So I mean, there's a lot to be said right there. Like people are pretty interested in this stuff from all sorts of perspectives, and you've been looking into the history of Mormonism for a long time.
Yeah, so I just want to say I have this YouTube channel, and it's called Mormon Book Reviews. So check it out and click and subscribe, because we talk about a ton of different things related to Mormonism, the history, the unique doctrines that Mormonism brings to the table, the idea that Mormonism kind of opens up ideas, looking at the nature of God and the nature of our existence, and kind of does it in a way that's counter to Orthodox Christianity. You know, Joseph Smith was what I would call a religious genius who was able to just tap into things and really get a sense of. I go back and forth. You know, some people say he's a fraud and a con man, and or they say he was this prophet, this prophet of God who was perfect almost. You know, and I think it's kind of in between. I think this was a man that was as flawed as any other man there is. And this, by the way, if you want to know what Joseph Smith looked like, that's what he looked like.
Nice.
That was a photograph that was just recently identified on my channel. Actually, was where we broke the news story, helped break the news story about this law. We had no idea there was ever a photograph taken of Joseph Smith, and there was, and that's what he looks like. So this is a man, and he was around 39, I think, in this picture, and he had a rough life because he was being chased by. Well, you could say he's being chased by Masons. You could say he was being chased by our government. You could say he was being chased by ex-members of his church. You could say he was being. There are a lot of people that actually wanted Joseph Smith dead, and I always think that a lot of people want somebody dead. Then maybe they're onto something, right? Maybe they're
right.
Yeah. Maybe they're doing something to make people feel uncomfortable. You know, and people who push back against the dominant narrative often end up being martyrs. And so I just kind of find Joseph Smith as a truly fascinating character that whether you believe in God, in the supernatural, or you just are a materialist and all that, it's still a fascinating story. If you're interested in how does a religion start? How does scripture come forth? What does it look like? What does it look like to even have a picture of a prophet, right? We don't have pictures of Moses, right? But to be able to engage a man who's a man in many ways of our time and place and space, right? But yet he had the audacity to bring forth new scripture. When all the other Protestants and Catholics and other Christians were saying, no, the canon is closed. And ironically enough, they closed the canon. Why? The Catholics closed the canon of the Bible. What does that mean? The canon it means like, okay, there could be no more books added to the Bible. This is it. God is done speaking to us. The Catholic Church makes this declaration, thus saith the Lord almost. And you know what happens? The Protestants, the people who are protesting against the Catholic Church, you know what they do? They say, okay, we'll fall for that. And the reason why the Council of Trent did that was because it was part of the Counter-Reformation. It was the pushback against the pushback of the church. against the dominant narrative that the Catholic Church had controlled for like 1,000 years. And the Protestants went ahead and said, okay, no, we'll close the canon. The beautiful thing about the Book of Mormon and what it does is it just kind of crashes right into the middle of history and makes an audacious claim saying, no, God is not through done talking to us, that prophets can still exist into this day. Because even many say that only prophets are from the days of old. Only scripture can come from days of old. And I'm like, well, as a young boy, I remember growing up and thinking, you know, I grew up as an evangelical kid in the evangelical household. By the way, that's right. I'm not a Mormon. I'm an evangelical Christian. And I even thought, like, it doesn't seem like our scriptures, our Bible's working anymore. People seem to be ignoring God. And it doesn't seem like our Bible works anymore. We need a Bible 2.0. But then I find out about this other young boy, other scriptures. And that's when you could argue it clicked for me and Joseph. I feel in one sense we have a spiritual kinship with each other in that way, same way. I think we asked the same questions when we were young. We questioned, we pushed back against the dominant narrative. And one of the things I did push back against on the dominant narrative was as a young boy, where everybody else in the evangelical world's like, left behind, we're going to be raptured, and all this kind of stuff. By the time I was in second grade, I was like, there ain't going to be a rapture.
Wow.
What? Yeah, see, even as a young kid, I was like, I always pushed back against the dominant narrative. So when I see Joseph Smith, when I see Martin Luther, when I see all these people doing the same thing, I'm like, yeah, maybe I don't agree with you 100%, but you know what? We need people to throw in hand grenades into silos and people who are willing to stand up and say, no, yeah, standing athwart history and saying, this is we're heading in the wrong direction. And who, if you will, time travelers, people who are outside of their space and time, who enter into this world with a completely different paradigm of looking at the world and the universe and how everything, that's a time traveler in one sense, because they're actually affecting what they did in the past now affects the future. Now this young farm boy, very educated, he comes into the scene, gives us new scriptures, and changes the face of American Christianity, thus changing the face of religion in the world. And this is
right.
Backwoods farm boy. I mean, that's a remarkable story. It cannot be easily dismissed.
Yeah, it's too crazy. I love how you there's an echo. I'm sorry. Is that me?
No, that's okay. I don't hear any. I'm good on my side. So.
Oh, okay. It was like a streamer thing. Yeah, I think it's really amazing how you put that, because so many people want to put it into he's a heretic or a pious fraud or anything else like that. But if you just try to put yourself in someone's shoes, which is really, I think, always the best way, try to understand how could this happen? Because so many people are like, how could you do this? Well, as soon as you're in that circumstance doing it yourself, you're like, oh, this wasn't so hard. I can see how this could have happened to me, you know? And Joseph Smith is just a character in this narrative, but we realize, like he said, he's not that far away. And so many of these stories are about 1,000 years ago, and we're able to dismiss whether or not these people had the same mental faculties or the same social dilemmas or anything. But I mean, yeah, he was building, again, this is 19th century utopian socialism. The idea of building these communities, there's already effort to the United Order, right? And like you said, the Jacksonian Democrats and the Masons in this 1844 election with James Polk, it's crazy to think about how different America could have been, because here's a dude running for president out of Illinois before he's got a top hat. He's an abolitionist. This is 16 years or so before Abraham Lincoln. This is crazy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it could have been a different world.
He was a man way ahead of his time. I mean, I was talking to a very well-known ex-Mormon podcaster, and he went to me, and I'll tell you off camera who it is, because I don't want to divulge confidence. That's so respectful. He and I were having a conversation on the phone, and this guy's in the Mormon podcast world. He's very well known, and he's an ex-Mormon. But he said, you know, if Joseph Smith didn't decide to get into the religion-making business, as he described it, being a skeptic, he said he probably would have been elected president of the United States if he chose to go into politics. And I said, yeah, imagine if Joseph Smith was elected president. Imagine what he brought to the table. See, people don't understand that his platform in 1844 was revolutionary. Nobody else. He was a man beyond his, way ahead of his time. He was advocating the abolition of slavery, and the way it would have worked is they would have bought the slaves from the owners to financially consult them. So then we wouldn't have had a civil war, and they would have had compensation. He wanted to make prisons centers of learning, rather than be a place where you punish people. You actually try to better them by giving them the education they were probably deprived that got them there in the first place. And so to me, this is a progressive in the best sense of the term, you know, And nobody else was talking about this kind of stuff. He was a radical reformer who could have fundamentally changed the course of American politics if he was elected president. Sounds like somebody that would probably be a lot of the powers that be would like to have eliminated.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've had some conversations with Jacob Hansen and Jacob Isbell. They had the conversation back and forth. But what do you think about the polygamy issue? I mean, because it's so stark contrast, this rigidity of Brighamism in Utah versus what we understand about the intentions of, the Book of Mormon says anti-polygamist lines and things. Do you have feelings on that, or do you think he was maybe?
Okay, well, look, I have a lot of friends in both camps, and I have friends, especially based in Independence, Missouri, which is, by the way, folks, just so you know, you have the Prairie Saints, and these were the Mormons that chose to stay behind and not follow Brigham Young, and they would eventually coalesce and headquarter in Independence, Missouri, which is where they believe that Jesus will return and that the temple will be a new temple will be built in on that land. As a matter of fact, there's a spot set aside that's controlled by this small church with just a few thousand members that controls the spot where the future temple will be built and Jesus will reign from. Okay. And so, yeah, that's the temple lot right there. That big building with the spiral in the middle is the Community of Christ temple. And that empty green space right there, that's where the temple's going to be built. Now, just so you know, you have the LDS Visitor Center. That's the Mormon church. I've been there. I've had meetings in there. I've had LDS Stake Center. I will be having a conference there in April. I'll be meeting in that building. The Community of Christ Auditorium, and they have this beautiful, beautiful temple in the center there. So, and then of course, there's the historic stone church. Now, I've been to all these things, and the temple lot is what it's called, and that's called the Church of Christ Temple Lot. And they control it. And this was done through a lawsuit in the 1890s where the RLDS was suing to get possession of the temple lot. Well, what happened was that the Utah church did not want the RLDS, as it was called, because Community of Christ changed their name in the year 2000. They did not want the RLDS to get their hands on the temple lot. And this is just so you know, Joseph Smith's son was the president prophet of that church. Okay, so they chose not to even Brigham Young. Joseph Smith's family, immediate family, did not agree to follow Brigham Young. They stayed back. So they attempted to take over this lot, and they took it to court. And what happened was the Utah Saints provided a lot of the legal help to make sure that the RLDS did not get it. They would much rather that the temple lot, this tiny church, have possession of it. And that's what ultimately aided in them being then able to keep control of it, even though it's just a small little church that doesn't have a lot of money. And I think they've probably been offered hundreds of millions, if not more, for that lot, and they seem to hold back and not want to do anything. And that's just me speculating. If you scroll over a little bit more, you also notice there's also a United Nations Plaza Center there. And just so you understand, what this is, the United Nations Peace Plaza.
That's crazy. I never thought about that. That's insane. There's a in Zion.
Think about that. The United Nations has a spot in Zion.
Dude,
that's
this is
maintained by the Community of Christ. Right. And so, yeah. And just if you scroll back over and look at the temple lot temple, if you look, see how they have a map of the world. See, this is the Zionic concept of bringing Zion here on earth. And one of these ideas are manifested through the idea of building a type of New Jerusalem, or maybe it's the city of Enoch. Some people think it's some people think, I don't know. Let me throw this out there. Is there a theory out there that the New Jerusalem will go, because some people refer to it as the New Jerusalem, but then that just seems to contradict the Bible. So I'm just going to riff here and you tell me what you think, because you're Latter-day Saint. Yeah. I kind of think that within Latter-day Saint theology that the New Jerusalem is going to go to Israel, and that the city of Enoch is going to land in the temple lot. What do you think? What do you say to that?
So I like the idea that Eden, or the city of Enoch, opens up in Missouri, that there's a way that the portal opens up, because I think Eden probably was in Missouri. I know that sounds kind of Randall Carlson.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But if you've seen, I'm going to show you the Pacific Western Sea interior map really quickly. This is the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge. When you look into gradual feedback loops and how the environment has shifted, and we understand that this is the map of how we expected. Let me find a better example here. See, this is a great example. The Skull Creek Seaway right here. They'll tell you these things happened 100 million years ago. And then they say, okay, 10 million years ago. And they say, okay, maybe 1 million years ago. And then recently it's been within the last 10,000 years because of the Ice Age. And I find that really interesting, because you can dismiss something by saying it was so long ago. But also when we realize that it's not gradual, but cataclysmic, there are things that just happen so quickly that we go through these crazy periods. And if you notice, I mean, let's zoom in a little bit here. Like, look at where the states are, right? And so you've
Mhm.
got Missouri to Utah, essentially.
Mhm.
There's a sea in between the both of them, and that it pours out. It seems really practical that this could have been where humanity's cradle of civilization emerged out of the Americas into Africa. And that's a crazy enough theory, but we have so much gene flow and so many people living all over the world that it kind of makes sense that we have humans that have simultaneously evolved in different places because there was seafaring earliest on, right?
Yeah, and it's really interesting how the entire state of Missouri seems to be protected. It's not underwater, but it's near a waterway that would give these humans, when you have basically Adam basically blessing, his posterity and humanity, sending them off on their mission, if you will, and that's the perfect spot that one could launch from within the Latter-day Saint tradition, right? Like, again, I'm an evangelical Christian, but see, this is the thing. I love to think outside the box and speculate and have fun with this kind of stuff too. So yeah, and this is really interesting too, because actually there's in the panhandle of Florida, there was a book written that claimed that the Garden of Eden took place there.
Right.
But
I think Atlantis might have been in Florida.
what's that?
Parts of Atlantis. I mean, there's pretty good evidence from Dr. Longo about
Uh-huh.
Florida and Atlantis. I think that
Oh
there's
yeah,
a lot of
the Bimini Road isn't too far from us, and it's in that whole area. But here you have this. Some Christian author identified the Panhandle as being part of the Garden of Eden. But what's I find it interesting, it's also in many people's, especially within the Heartlander model, who believe that they actually came across around Africa, and then if you follow the story of the Phoenician, which is a modern expedition, that ship will take you, that the currents would take you to basically to Florida. And they believe that the landing spot for the Book of Mormon happened at the spot that this other Christian identifies as being the Garden of Eden. So it's kind of an interesting convergence, of those two worlds as well.
I forget his name, the Heartlander guy. I'm supposed to talk to him at some point. But the evidence for Florida that they returned through Florida is perfect because you can follow the sea currents and it leads you right into the Caribbean. And also, again, with changes of islands and moving of islands, because there are missing islands in the Caribbean now, and there are openings that weren't there before. So it would have been even more convenient to end up right at the coast of Florida. And this is where Ponce de Leon and all these different characters were going and looking for the Fountain of Youth, right? So and even considering that there are giants, like there are literally 9 to 10 foot skeletons in Florida, and people that were living to 90, 100, like Native American tribes that were living to like 90 to 100 years old. So there's a lot of people, even at the beginning of the Dutch trading period, that were starting their, like, the idea of retiring to Florida, that goes back like 500 years, because they were like, well, I'll retire where the Fountain of Youth is. And there's evidence that, people started living even 20 years longer, because you're living 67 years old in a city like New Amsterdam or New York, but you go to Florida and then it extends your life by 20 years. So there's evidence of health benefits from Florida that actually are legitimate. It's weird also how we think of science and magic as being so off, but a lot of time a primitive person is just telling you what they know about what makes you better, right? Like being in that place might actually be a healthier place, right?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And it's interesting is like, why would, like, it's interesting that this part of the world would have been, because the Garden of Eden may have been located in Missouri, but I imagine that that its influence would have also kind of been felt throughout, maybe the North American continent stronger than it would be in other parts of the world. And it just makes you wonder, like, does even the story of the Fountain of Youth, immortality, which would tie in with the Garden of Eden, people who were immortal, that could be some kind of echo from the past or something as well, or is maybe part of some kind of spiritual or mystical manifestation that would draw people, because they're trying to be drawn back to paradise. That's where we're supposed to go. We're going to go back to paradise, back to that Edonic space. And so perhaps these were little whispers of that people, because we're spiritual beings or hardwired spiritual animals, that perhaps we pick these things up and not even realize it, and know implicitly of something is there's a power here, or something that might echo from something in a primordial sense as well.
Yeah, I feel like there's always kind of a battle, it's kind of like Rudolf Steiner between like the Ahriman and Lucifer, this idea of extreme darkness, extreme light. There's maybe a balance in between. So when we look at Eden's this perfect natural God-made world versus Zion. Zion is man's closest thing to heaven. And so you can think of like the Revelation idea of Jerusalem as this Borg gold cube of singularity. I mean, it's very technologically forward, but Eden's not. Eden's technogaianism, or some sort of this idea that we're connected with nature, that it's all, we're harmonious and we're able to communicate with trees, you know, that kind of thing is, I think, when I was recently looking at that Christian evangelical who went to try to convert the Sentinel Islands, you know, the Sentinel Islands where no humans are allowed to go.
Yeah.
There. And it's interesting because, like, essentially what he did was he tried to visit and convert Eden, right? Like, that's like the last bastion of nature, of Eden, and it's crazy to think
in his primitive state, man in his, like, the early man, if you will, like,
but primitive prime. So it's funny when we say primitive, because I think the Western idea of primitive is bad, but it's really just like roots or primal, you know, and it could be that that's pure, you know, in a sense also.
Yes, because these people live in a garden, a jungle, and they're in tune with that land in a very unique way. And so, that makes you wonder. And then I just feel, you know, like these people feel like they need to go and convert. And this is the problem. This is the problem, folks. You know, like, I'm not like some progressive lefty or anything like that, but colonialism can wreak a lot of havoc on people. And part of colonialism was these white people going to other people, dark-skinned people, to save them. And as a result, their cultures get wiped out and destroyed, whether it's through genocide, whether it's through disease, whether it's through or this flat out, you know, that genocide, they're like going after them, forced conversions, make destruction of their culture, destructions of their lands.
The irony being that, like, was Jesus white? So I get the feeling that this already happened once before to the pink people that were, you know what I mean? Like, white is this sort of the Pink Floyd poster, you know, Floyd's pink. It's the white is when you get the homogeny through the Babylonian pyramid, right? So you've got this idea where white people, or whatever they are, they're going and they're converting people. There's like, let me tell you about Jesus. And like, oh yeah, what did he look like? So, well, he was tall. No, what color was his eyes? Well, I don't know. Did your father see him? No. Like, well, you've never seen this guy and you want me to believe in this? Like, who is this guy? It's so beyond what this is why Muhammad isn't shown, right? Because if you're converting, eventually you need to understand there's reciprocity. And I think a lot of missionaries, this is something that the Mormons are just figuring out. Like, I just saw pictures of them wearing sarongs on their mission in Samoa. First time, you know, and this is great because it shows that they've always tried to respect people. They try to wear suits to be respectful. Suits are not respectful in some places. Women wear pants, you know what I mean? So having a sarong, so now they're trying to meet you at your place, right? So this is the beginning. And I think the Jesuits did this 500 years ago. They realized at a certain point when they got to China, or oh, that's how you worship God. That's how you worship God. Okay. We need a bit more. It can be great to have missionary work if there's reciprocity.
And I think that's key. And actually, I'm really glad you brought up the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were Pauline in their approach, being all things to all people, and trying to take practices like here Paul goes and talks. It goes to the altar of the unknown God, and he's engaging the pantheon of the gods of Greece, right? And he's having a conversation with these people from all these different religions, and then Christianity, what it does is, in one sense, he kind of picks and chooses these types of things and integrates it into Christianity, including like Sunday worship and all these other kind of things, right? And so it's integrated and taking and borrowing from all these other different cultures and amalgamating it and putting it into Christianity. And what the Jesuits are doing is they're doing a very similar thing. They go to these other cultures, like, oh, you have a festival on that day for that. Okay, well, let's kind of pull from that and bring that in there, you know, and start having this interesting conversation. And then what happens is that basically the Jesuits go and missionize the world. And then the Protestants come. And then the Protestants say, well, now you got to look like us. You got to conform. You got to dress up a certain way. You got to blah, blah, blah. And your holidays and your gods are not, nope, boom, 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 throw them all out. And then so what happens is of course, the Catholics are like, oh, little stinkers, those Protestants. And then the Protestants, they lay the groundwork. And then what happens? Then we have a third wave. Then we have the Mormon missionaries come. And then the Protestants are like, wait a second, we did all this work. And now they're picking off our people. It's like, well, hang on. Actually, it was the Jesuits that laid it out for you. And so you got to understand that, hey, they're just doing exactly what we did over the course of the last few hundred years. They're just following our lead, and they're reimagining Christianity, and they're bringing a different aspect to it as well. And I find that fascinating. And I do think it's important because, unfortunately, I think with the homogenization, the correlation within the Mormon Church, it kind of squeezed out the creativity and the speculative and the weirdness of Mormonism. Like I tell us to keep Mormonism weird. That's the key thing. Keep Mormonism weird. I don't want you to become just like us. I don't want you to become boring Protestants. I want there to be the excitement, the visionary of this genius that is Joseph Smith. And so we have this whole thing now where apparently that the Mormons are starting to now engage and have the conversations with these different cultures. And that's what the beautiful thing about Mormonism is. It's open to the idea of learning from other religions and other faith traditions, where the good and the true from other places, and integrating it into the conversation. So I think that's a positive thing, in sense, net positive for humanity. That if we quit trying to proselytize and then make people like us and make them do things. And this is the thing, unfortunately, with Mormonism is you could go to any ward anywhere and it's going to be the same thing. I want the individual cultures to be different and having a reflect. Before correlation in the 1950s, there was a lot more diversity in the way buildings looked, the way services looked, how people talk. Churches would make their own Sunday school materials. It wasn't all top down. They'd have a lot more freedom. I'd like to have a little bit more of that in the Mormon world as well. So you have this kind of like this corporate church that's kind of like American
intellectual reserve,
right? And then we have what's going on the ground. And I think it's really important that we continue. The beauty about Mormonism is that it has the ability to change on a dime. I mean, literally tomorrow, President Nelson could have a revelation, and they could do a pivot. And then it's really one of the few religions in the world that has the potentiality to do it. Unfortunately, I want to see more revelation from the prophets, if you will. I don't want manifestos. I don't want proclamations. I want to see more revelation, like what gave us with Joseph Smith, in the context of, look at the corpus of his work. It's remarkable. I mean, and then the rest of the prophets that come after him. I'm sorry, I'm not saying this to be negative, but I'm saying it's different. Measure up. Doesn't measure up with the work of Joseph, right?
Well, it's crazy. Like, again, looking at the temple lot, because it really does come down to this idea that there's supposed to be a Zionic utopia that happens, and essentially the lines between heaven and earth become blurry, right? It's an uncanny valley where immortality and all-knowingness and miracles and things start to emerge because we're getting closer and closer to that. But it also comes from unity. And so in a weird way, it's interesting because here you see that quilt, if you will, of different ideas of Mormonism happening naturally, right? This is maybe what's supposed to happen. But on the other hand, it's lacking in, if you throw a stone, you'd hit a window. Nobody's really working together in that respect, except maybe the LDS, in the sense that they've been paying for and taking care of the temple lot. But even that, you have to think about the dynamic there, because while Joseph Smith's son was in charge of the reorganized church, it was Joseph Smith's grandnephew, right? It was Joseph Smith's son's cousin, Joseph Fielding Smith, one of the, I think, who was in charge at the, is that right? At the time, it was his cousin.
No, I don't. There, I'll have to refresh my history on that, but there wasn't a whole lot of Smith family involved in the temple lot. This was no,
I'm sorry. I mean to say that the actual Mormon, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Brighamite Church, that at that point it was run by the nephew of Joseph Smith.
So when they had the split, I mean, the kerfuffle about the temple lot site, it was actually Joseph Smith III, Joseph Smith's son, was still the president and prophet of the church when that lawsuit happened. And actually, that's where all the affidavits were compiled. A lot of affidavits about Joseph Smith's polygamy kind of come out of those out of that as well. As a matter of fact, this all leads back again to our. Then he would come. Joseph Fielding Smith. He was the president of the church at the time. And so they were cousins. Thank you for clarifying that. So they're cousins. So you have Joseph Smith III and Joseph F. Smith, and they're battling each other. So you even have a battle of family.
It's just the craziest thing, because I mean, I know John Hamer's talked about this a little bit, but just the idea that the RDLS church was so anti-polygamy, and by the point that they're interacting, the LDS church is anti-polygamy. It's the manifesto. It's over polygamy, arguably. Right. And so it seems like that was the moment when, I mean, and your cousins, that was the moment when the churches were supposed to find a way to work together again. Yeah. And the RDLS church had already figured out the priesthood ban. They'd already successfully started integrating African Americans. So, I mean,
during the Civil War era, they're allowing black priests. So
Yeah.
in one sense, I think who's the prophet there? I think Joseph Smith the third is more prophetic than
in that time.
In that time, yeah.
Well, Brigham Young is saying he's not. I mean, he says he's not received revelation, right? He's saying that he's not experienced the same revelation that Joseph Smith had, and I think that sets precedent for, like you said, manifestos and testimonies over revelation, which is dangerous, right? Because the whole idea should be to have revelation, but we have to define it probably.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, all started with a question that I don't think I answered yet, and that was, what do you think about the whole polygamy thing, right? Did Joseph Smith practice polygamy? Okay,
Yeah.
so I have a lot of friends on both sides of this whole issue, and I will. Let me tell you how I think and operate. I always, because I try to be semi-scholarly in this channel, like I really want to talk to the best scholars, the best historians, and the best evidence that's out there. And of course, that even that picture of Richard Bushman, he's probably the lead. I mean, he is numero uno, the biggest like top Mormon scholar. Okay, that's like, he's the big deal, and I've had him on my show twice. And I have to tell you that I have people who don't believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. One would be the traditional RLDS. Now later, the Community of Christ would later say yes, Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. And then the Utah church will say, yes, Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. For a while there was kind of a narrative, even in the Utah world, where it's like, well, it was kind of Brigham's thing, and Joseph really didn't do it. Or they'd say it was more spiritual Joseph, because he didn't have any heirs and all this kind of stuff. And I have to say that when I look into an issue, my fallback position on an issue that I haven't thoroughly studied is, what is the scholarly consensus on this issue? And then until I do my own investigation, I will just defer to the scholarly consensus, because I think, hey, there's a lot of people that have done the work, they've done the research, and they've had it peer reviewed. And so I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'll just accept that at face value. Now, if somebody goes, so I would say, yes, do I believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy? Yes, I believe Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. But if somebody wants to come and give me counter evidence to it, I'm not. Look, I'm a neutral. I'm the only neutral Mormon podcaster, because I'm the only outsider. It's either pro Mormon or it's anti. There's no one in between. The only one that's occupies a very unique neutral space. So people know that I'm fair in my judgments. And for some, it's a political thing. For some, it's very it's important that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, or it's important that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, and that there's a lot at stake, because it kind of views who the authority of what church is the true church. And is Brigham Young a usurper, or is he the legitimate successor to Joseph Smith, right? Because people back east who didn't follow Brigham Young would consider Brigham Young to be a usurper and not the true prophet, and they would say that, well, there's some evidence that Joseph Smith did confer upon Joseph Smith III, that confer to him that he would be the prophetic mantle passed on to him
at some point, right? Well,
yeah. So we have to, the very, even at the break off, of 1844, when Joseph Smith, candidate for president and prophet, seer, and revelator, is assassinated. And by the way, he's the very first presidential candidate ever to be assassinated on American soil.
Fun fact.
And that's kind of what caused just this huge dispersion that happened, and it really caused there to be like this scattering, if you will. They call it the scattering of the saints. And some ended up going with James Strang, who claimed to have found plates of a lost ancient civilization, just like Joseph Smith did, and claims to have translated them. The Vori, the Verutu, the Vori record. I forget. I'll get the full name. It will hit me in a minute. But either way, so he claimed, and then he also crowned himself king of the world, just like Joseph Smith was crowned king of the world as well in the Council of 50. And he also would translate scripture, James Strang, and then they would end up building a community in Beaver Island in Lake Michigan. And interestingly enough, he would also run for office. He would run for state senate in Michigan. This is what's so interesting, because in some ways, many could argue that James Strang was the correct successor.
Oh yeah, well, because for a while.
Well, he followed the pattern. But not only did he run for office, he actually got elected, and it was because of some of the anti-slavery legislation that he introduced in the legislature in Michigan in the 1840s that initiated this idea of, we need to start being a little bit more anti-slavery in the free states, in the northern states. So they started passing legislation that was more anti-slavery. They gave more protections, maybe to like slaves that leave and also escape. And that started a thing in the North and the Midwest where other state legislatures started following this. So in one sense, James Strang was that also progressive trailblazer in the slavery issue, much the same way that Joseph Smith was. Okay. So now what's so fascinating, another parallel with Joseph Smith is he ends up getting assassinated, just like Joseph Smith. He gets martyred as well. So this is a really messy.
And I would comment also on the Strangites that they after they killed Strang, they kidnapped the Strangites who had their communities around Michigan. They would at night, people came with boats and would kidnap their villages and scatter them.
Yeah, so
this is mind-boggling.
This is what they did. They deliberately did this. What they did was they went to the island and they threw them all out of the island, and then they made a point to scatter them to all different ports. They didn't take them to one landing spot. They deliberately separated them, and that's really what ultimately kept the church from. It really was kind of the death knell. Now the church still exists. It actually has a flourishing congregation of a couple hundred people in Burlington, Wisconsin. And that's near the site where the plates of this lost civilization were allegedly.
Isn't John Hijack associated with them? Is he?
John Hijack is also a Strangite, and he does have a legitimate line of succession, if you will, through his baptism, and his actually was baptized here in Florida. John Hijack, not too far from where I live. One day we're going to film with John, and I are going to film something at his baptism site. But he actually he actually had there's a tension between the congregation there in Wisconsin and with John. So yes, they all would identify as Strangites. They would all identify as Mormons and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The key thing is it's a capital D and no hyphen, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they all come from that tradition. There is, unfortunately, as we know, that there are infighting and sects that also happen in all religions. And so, yeah, but John is definitely a legitimate part of that tradition. No question about it. He's also a very, very important voice for that expression of the restoration.
Wow. It's interesting because, Joseph Smith says he wants his son to be in charge when he's old enough. Strang does a pretty good job, it seems like, up until they're systematically destroyed. And it's also interesting looking at like the Oregon Trail, right? Because the southern line of Oregon Trail under the river is Oregon Trail, but the north of the river, the same trail is the Mormon Trail, right? And so they're going from, I just played the game again recently, and it starts out in Independence, Missouri, and I was like, my God, I never thought about this. Oregon Trail is the Mormon expedition. It's 1846, 1849, and they're leaving. This is literally the same thing. But it's interesting thinking about the polygamy issue a little bit, because Joseph Smith and the wives that they've picked to say are his wives, right? Particularly Lucinda Pendleton Morgan Smith. Let me go back a second here. Lucinda Pendleton Morgan, right? So the wife of William Morgan from the Morgan affair. So the anti-Masonry thing, this is the craziest thing to me, that it ties everything. What do you think about that? About the whole thing with him tied to the anti-Masonry William affair directly?
Oh, yeah.
One from Kevin Bacon.
Okay, so this is what's so like mind-blowing about the Masonic Mormon connection, is that it was there, I think, in many ways from the beginning. Okay, so there's this book called Method Infinite, and it talks about let's see here. Here's the book: Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration. And and so that's a really good book. I recommend that for your collection. And I've read parts of it. Actually, I'm waiting because they're going to make a leather-bound edition of this, a special edition of this, and I'm going to get my hands on one of those copies. And I'm going to have them come on my program. But I also had in echoing this book, I also had Jason Smith on, who's a Mason. And what's so fascinating is that originally the Book of Mormon, now some people think, like, who believe like in a naturalistic explanation of the Book of Mormon, is that the name Mormon was actually named after William Morgan. And William Morgan was the man that did an expose on Freemasonry, and he ends up getting assassinated by the Masons for exposing the secret temple rituals. Okay, so some think that maybe it was almost the name Mormon was an homage to Morgan, right? Fascinating, again, if it's all naturalistic. But also what was so fascinating to me was that the Book of Mormon was referred to at the time, and I think even Martin Harris referred to it as the anti-Masonic Bible.
Right.
Anti-Masonic Bible.
Well, it has a lot of stuff like the secret combinations and all that.
Yes.
You know, this idea. Yeah.
But this is the thing. This is the crazy thing that will blow your mind. It may also be a Masonic Bible, because there's a parallel that's going on in this story. Okay. So first of all, if you ever read the Lost 116 Pages book by Don Bradley,
Of course.
okay,
Yeah, of course.
So apparently, there is a description of when they found the plates that there was actually something that was tantamount to a square and compass placed over the plates.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now this is the understanding of Freemasonry at the time.
And you've never been like a Mormon or a Mason. You're not a member of the Order of Melchizedek or any of that stuff. But you're familiar with some of the tokens and stuff, right?
Right. So
Okay.
so here we have this story, and actually it parallels the Book of Mormon story. Within Freemasonry, there was this idea that there's pure and good Masonry, and then there's corrupted Masonry. Matter of fact, I heard one of the early apostles in the church referred to of Mormonism as being restored Masonry. That
Right.
It was actually Joseph Smith was also restoring Masonry, and we think that he was trying to restore Masonry in 1844, circa that period of time, with the temple rituals.
Yeah.
But here we have a parallel story that describes a square and compass type thing on top of the plates. All right. And then we read in the text of the Book of Mormon about secret combinations, right? And there's a parallel to Mormonism and to Masonry. And by the way, the term secret combinations that we actually have evidence that the Masons were referred to in 1820s America as secret combinations.
Yeah.
So now we have this idea, but we got to extend it out a little bit before that. We got this group called, it's founded by Asum Weishaupt, called the Illuminati in 1776. Interestingly enough, the same year that the United States declared its independence. And there's an address given by George Washington in which who's a Mason, but he warns about the type of Masonry that is part of the Illuminati. So now we have this idea baked into the American consciousness of a pure Masonry and a corrupted Masonry, a Masonry that's good and can trace its lineage to Solomon.
Yeah.
And then we have a Luciferian inspired Masonry via the Illuminati. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You can look this up. These are real dates. Like, there was an Adam Weishaupt, but he did start the Illuminati. There was George Washington who had concerns about this type of strain of Illuminatiism, if you will, infiltrating America and corrupting its society. And so the idea is that the Freemasonry that existed, that William Morgan was blowing the whistle on, was corrupt and was actually trying to take over our government. And right in Joseph Smith's backyard, you had essentially that area of New York was the stronghold of the anti-Mason party, growing out of the killing of William Morgan. Okay, that's what caused the anti-Mason party to explode. And at this time, Andrew Jackson is the Democrat nominee and he's a Mason. Okay, so now but let's go back to the Book of Mormon. It talks about, people always thought, okay, the Book of Mormon is explicitly an anti-Masonic Bible, right? But actually, no, there's a parallel, and it's talked about in Method Infinite. Oh, I love Tim Pool. Hi, Tim. I mean, cool. And we have this interesting parallel of good Masonry and bad Masonry in the American story, and we can see that we also have the idea that there was secret combinations in the Book of Mormon that was trying to corrupt and overthrow the governments. Okay. But it's an idea that this is a corruption of something that was pure. And then we can even go back to when we're talking about in the Book of Moses, when Cain killed Abel, there's a spot where he says, "I am Master Mahon," which sounds a lot like Master Mason. So we almost from the beginning of parallels of two strains of Freemasonry, one that's good, that's based in Solomon, and another that's Luciferian, and that the Illuminati was tapping into the Luciferian tradition as well.
And you have both during Solomon, right? Because Solomon, you've got, as soon as you cut the stone, you defile the building of the temple. So you have stone cutters emerging then, and you're told right then this is not the way of Solomon. There are tabernacles and everything is the divisions at that point. But then he starts. Solomon makes a temple for his wife's god, I believe is the thing, right? So it starts all of the trouble at that point. Then that's where her group of priests come in. And there's all these connections also with Egyptian mythology, Osarseph and Moses and Akhenaten. The idea that out of Egypt, you're spending 40 years trying to erase the Egyptian influence on your culture as you're moving into the Amarna or new city, this new Aten, henotheism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder about the Freemason connection because it makes a lot of, like, you've got the Hiram Abiff and you've got Hiram Smith. You have
Right.
a very Masonic family. I know you've probably seen like the Lucy Code. Have you seen that? Right? That idea of the Lucy Smith was maybe involved with the idea of producing the Book of Mormon. And
I've heard. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that idea that the entire Smith family was somehow trying to make their beliefs commonplace, right? Like they're working together on this. It wasn't just Joseph. What do you think?
I think that the Smith family is part of the Book of Mormon in the sense that the Smith family's story is reflected in the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and people will tell you, even Richard Bushman and Rough Stone Rolling will tell you about the family dynamics of the Book of Mormon mirrored that of Joseph Smith. I actually look, whether I take a naturalistic explanation that it's all man-made, or I take a more supernatural explanation. I think for me, everything about the Book of Mormon can be placed right at Joseph Smith's feet. Now, there's other people that I'm looking at, other research. People are telling me, no, I actually think so-and-so was also involved. And let me give you my evidence. I sit down with scholars and they give me their stuff. So it's still a story that's being told and unfolding. But at this point, where the evidence I say is that I think the Book of Mormon lands right at Joseph Smith's feet. And whether he's using the Urim and Thummim spectacles and or the seer stone in a hat, okay, and you can go either way on that one too. Only he knows, looking into that hat, what was really going on. That's my belief. And so whatever comes out of his mouth either was coming from here, or it was coming from these objects that with these spectacles that he was able to do the translation with, or it was a combination of the two. It was also Joseph Smith makes the family dynamics of Joseph Smith's family makes its way into the Book of Mormon because he is dealing with this foreign language. And he's the interpreter or the translator's fingerprints are going to get all over the translation of the process of the Book of Mormon. So that's why I can't say either or on this whole thing. But I do. Right. I don't think I need a bunch of people in a conspiracy working together with Joseph Smith. I think that even a naturalistic explanation for me, if he's just, I think it all comes from him. But
subconsciously,
I think he's a genius. However you look at him.
Right.
And again, somebody who's a believer, and again, I'm an evangelical Christian, in one sense, no dog in this fight. But as somebody who's a believer, I can't just dismiss Joseph Smith, and I cannot dismiss the Book of Mormon, because it makes a claim, an audacious claim. And the reality is that we have new American scripture. We have it. We can't deny the existence of American scripture.
It's pretty based. Also, have you heard of Mormon Belgium? So there's a Rosicrucian order that comes out of Mormon Erezi in Wallonia. Mm-hmm. It's pronounced Mormon. It's pronounced Mormon, but it's with a T. But they have a Rosicrucian temple and order here that do baptisms of the dead. And I know I saw Doll Cleek said she has a friend who is Mormon. They said they can baptize or save the dead. Yes, it's called ceremonial magic, and it's super based. But no, with the idea that it comes from older traditions, because you're talking about the Freemasonry and Rosicrucians. America, you've got both, really. You have this idea of Sir Francis Bacon's Nova Atlantis. They find a Bible on the shore of the Americas, and they've built their own new American Zion, right? That sounds a lot like the Rosicrucian narrative. Sounds a lot like the positive Masonic Mormonism. Even the fact that they have baptism for the dead Rosicrucian rituals that mirror them. Do you think that there's a connection at all with Rosicrucianism? Have you looked into Rosicrucianism?
I mean, I have a little bit knowledge of it. I've studied it in the past, and I do find that these are potential influences on this world. There's no question that we're having a dialogue here about these ideas and concepts. But I want to go back to that Lost 116 Pages book a little bit, because Don Bradley, the author, basically what he tried to do is, folks, just so you know the story, like, and if you watch the South Park episode, we all know what we're talking about, was the lost 116 pages of the Book of Mormon were lost, the first 116 pages they did. And it's actually longer than 116 pages, by the way. That's also a misnomer. But basically what Don shows is that Nauvoo era temple rites make their way into the pages of the lost 116 pages. So the idea was that originally the Book of Mormon was an anti-Masonic Bible, and it was against Freemasonry. And then, interestingly enough, William Morgan's and Joseph Smith ends up marrying William Morgan's widow down the road. And then, interestingly enough, Joseph Smith becomes a Mason in Nauvoo, Illinois. And then, interestingly enough, he introduces temple practices that seem to be reflective of Freemasonry. However, just so people understand the last 116 pages, there's this idea in scholarship where they've been able to reconstruct old Greek plays that were lost based on what people were saying about those plays. So they could kind of reconstruct these lost plays because there was enough second and third hand information about talking about this play. So they can kind of reconstruct the plays. Well, it's the same thing with the Book of Mormon. Don was able to reconstruct parts of the lost pages of 116 pages of the book because there were people that were talking about stories from the Book of Mormon that aren't in the Book of Mormon. Martin Harris was talking about stuff. Martin Harris's brother was talking about stuff. Sidney Rigdon talked about stuff later, and that's another interesting story about Sidney Rigdon. And then we have Joseph Smith's father being interviewed by these people who are outsiders, asking him about the Book of Mormon, and he's telling them stories that are not in our current edition of the Book of Mormon. So that's how he's able to reconstruct it. And Don was able to tease out of that text that what we thought would be later innovations of Mormonism actually perhaps were there at the very beginning. And then this conversation that Joseph Smith is having with his modern world, the conversation that Joseph Smith is having with William Morgan, because see, this is the thing. During Joseph Smith's time, you had William Morgan's expose that exposed the temple rites, the Masonic temple rites, but also they would do traveling shows, outdoor theaters where people would go around and do these demonstrations of this Masonic rites. So it would have been known to Joseph. So now, whether we're just taking a naturalistic explanation, Joseph Smith was taking those things that he was learning about, maybe watching those recreations or reading, or maybe even just hearing what people are saying about what's in William Morgan's book, and it makes its way into the Book of Mormon. And then we actually have Freemason Freemason or Nauvoo, what we would later call Nauvoo era temple stuff in the Book of Mormon was influenced by the Freemason connection, and or there was actually the Nauvoo endowment ceremony was present at that time. Whether you want to go supernatural, natural, I'll go either way on that. But I think it's a fascinating hypothesis that Don brings that actually Mormonism wasn't meant to be anti-Masonic at all. It was actually pro-Mason in the sense that the good aspects of Mason, and as a counter to the counterfeit Masonry.
Wow, that's really interesting. Wondering about the temple ordinances makes you really consider just how much Freemasonry has existed, or some sort of, temple traditions have existed since the very beginning of time. And so why do you think they're so important? Why do we need them so badly?
Why do we need the temple rites?
Well, just maybe, it seems like we're going through these rituals, right? Like the Masonry thing is like you go through a stage and the next stage, and that way they can make sure that you don't have any spoilers. So you have the emotional response at the right time. I mean, what do you think is the reason why we have secrets versus mysteries, right? Why do we keep secrets and respecting mysteries?
And this is the thing I always tell people, is that I don't really have a problem in many ways with the temple rites. And I'll tell you why, because literally at contemporary to Joseph Smith, millions of evangelicals were participating in similar ceremonies in Masonic halls. And to this day, millions of evangelicals participate in these ceremonies. And you know who the largest single group is of membership in the Freemasons? It's Southern Baptists, the largest evangelical denomination in the world, okay, or in America. And so it's still there. The Masonic temple rites are still part of, in many ways, it's practiced by evangelicals. So I think it's really weird that we go after the Utah Saints when there are probably million more evangelicals participating in the base in many of the similar parallel ceremonies to this day. So I'm like,
Almost certainly.
why are we making a big deal about this? Well, and then I think, honestly, this is what's so cool. I got to find the picture and I'll try to find it because I got a story to tell about a Mason I ran into yesterday, which is really fascinating. Yeah, here it is. This is the back of his shirt. Widow's son's Masonic Ra. Okay.
Wow.
And I go to this guy and say, can I take your picture of the back of this? And he's like, I'm like, yeah. And then I go to him and I say, I just started asking him, I said, well, tell me about yourself. And he starts talking. And I said, oh, I noticed that you're a chaplain, because he had a cross.
Wow. Wow.
So he's a Masonic chaplain. And then, but do you know what the mind-blowing thing is? I go say, well, where do you go to church? Because here I am in Florida, and of course I'm just assuming Baptist, right? He said, oh, I'm a Roman Catholic. I said, wait, you're a Roman Catholic and you're a Masonic chaplain? I was like, I mean, you're not allowed to be a Mason. And
yeah, how do they get away with that?
In the Catholic Church? And he's just like, hey, they accept me. And I'm like, apparently they don't give much trouble about it in the Catholic Church. So he is a religious figure, a Christian religious figure in one sense, right? Because he's got a cross, and he's a Catholic, and he's a Freemason. See, this is the amalgamation that goes on. That people like to put people in boxes. Well, no, you have to be in this category. You have to do this. I freaking ran into a Roman Catholic chaplain for the Masons. And so that's really that's the interesting. Those are the spaces I like to occupy. I don't think it's coincidental. I ran into him yesterday, and took that picture. Right?
He's probably a time traveler.
Traveler, yeah.
Well,
exactly.
It's interesting because the Masons and the Christian, like if you look at the Jesuit suppression, when the Jesuits were excommunicated from the Catholic Church, that's when Freemasonry, Adam Weishaupt really like rise up, Illuminati version, and they have a lot of money, so they're purchasing lodges so they can kind of use the back rooms for their purposes, right? Like the YMCA or something like that. And you can see that goes on. But the idea that the Jesuits needed a group that couldn't be Catholic at that time, because that would confirm that you wouldn't have any worries that the rest of the church, you wouldn't be more loyal to the Pope than you would be to the.
So do you think that the Jesuits may have played a role in starting Masonry?
Maybe not starting Masonry, but Illuminati for sure. I think if you look at, it's always one of those follow the money things, and the Vatican Bank was the biggest bank at the time because of the Knights Templar. They were the only bank that could really loan until they started proxying through the Jews, right? And so it's funny because people really blame Jewish banking, but the Vatican and the Knights Templar were the ones who really set up the Rothschild and in certain particular families, right? It's again with this idea of putting everyone in boxes.
Right.
And there's this idea, there's a book from the 13th century from Spain called The Song of Roland, which talks about the Knights Templars and the Ottomans, and then the Muslims and the Catholic peasants. And wouldn't you know it, the Catholic and the Muslim peasants are working together to try to evade the taxing and the murder by the Templar and the Ottomans who are working, the elite are working together. It's always horizontal. It's never vertical. So of course, you're going to find that the elite are interacting with each other. And the Catholic Church was so weird at that time, right? 15th to the 17th, 19th century, crazy things were happening in different parts of the Catholic Church, particularly with the Jesuits or.
Yeah, well, there's a period of time the Jesuits were excommunicated from the church even.
Right.
I mean,
but they were still running the Maristas and the Franciscan. They still had their power. But you know where they were at? Well, they were excommunicated. They were allowed to be in the United States. They were allowed to be in Belgium under Catherine the Great. So there were two holdout countries. And it's interesting that those are very Masonic countries, right?
I love this. Like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, actually. I'm kind of like the counter to Alex Jones in many ways. Like I'm a total uber skeptic, but I like to occupy.
Too, believe it or not.
I'm sure in some ways that he would qualify as a skeptic as well. And I have mixed feelings about the guy, but I'm not here to go and bash on people or anything like that. There's already enough stuff out there about him. But going back to this idea of the need for doing these kind of things, and I also do think that I do think that there are, especially young men in our society, who don't have they're wayward, and they don't have a lot of direction in their life, I can see for them the appeal to joining Freemasonry, and that it can help them become better men, and it teaches them ethics and values. And I think that on the local level, in the community that you're participating in, I think that there can be some benefit as a young person, if you're kind of like looking for direction, that the Brotherhood of the Freemasonry. I'm not endorsing Masonry, by the way. I'm just saying I can see the utility and the value of having a community of of other men that can look out for you and mentor you as well, and give you good practical advice. You know, I've kind of become a mentor to a lot of young men through my channel, just organically. I mean, I have college students reach out to me and like wanting life advice, and I'm like, what am I becoming, Jordan Peterson? What's going on? But it's just interesting that there's that need, especially young men who right now it's not easy being a male. You have to be very careful about what you say. You can't look, the stuff that you and I were able to do and say not that long ago. We can't get away with that in the in many ways, right? Because we would be canceled. You know, the jokes and all this stuff, hanging out at the bar and hanging out and having a good time. Now it's almost like even in those spaces, you have to be careful about what you say or do. And it's just kind of sad, And actually, I think when we were talking on the phone the other day, we were talking about the halcyon days of the 1990s and listening to Art Bell. The simplicity of turning on that radio station, the Coast to Coast AM, which I listened to on WLS AM, the 50,000 watt channel that covered 38 states and 4 Canadian provinces. So you could, anywhere you were traveling, you could listen to Art Bell through most of the country. And I always thought that he was just an interesting dude because he let a lot of people come in and just anybody could call in. There was like hardly no call screening or anything. I think he was even doing the call screening. I mean, literally, it was just put them on and let them talk, And now everything has become so like controlled that you have to watch what you say and all this kind of stuff. And I just kind of miss. It's kind of ironic that we thought that the internet was going to be this place where all these ideas were explored. Yeah, I don't know. I would argue that AM radio after midnight in the 1990s probably was a better form for free expression than the internet has become.
Wow. It's really true. I mean, I think that's a great criticism. And it's, the idea of being a skeptic and questioning everything. And like, it's also something that we face. Like, how can you be careful when you question something, because you have to be respectful and you don't want to hurt people. But we do live in a world where people seem to act impulsively with information, not contemplate information.
Yes, I agree. And I do feel that, look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do say that there's a lot of manipulation going on of people. And there's this constant fear and this constant this 24-hour news cycle that's just constantly just badgering us and throwing information at us, throwing us at us. And I disconnect from that. You got to disconnect from that world. And I do feel like, what bothers me is that I feel like the voices, the adults in the room are no longer here. They've been pushed out. And it's basically our society is literally controlled by the extremes in the Republican Party, the extremes in the Democrat Party. And there's this huge, vast middle of people that just want to.
Yeah, there's all these Masonic Chaplain Catholics. I mean, come on, there's people in the middle. Yeah,
that's right. There's all these people in the middle, right? And you know what we want? We just want to live in safe neighborhoods. And many of us do, actually. It's in many ways it's not as bad as people think, but we just want to live our lives and be left alone. And they get us all caught up in all of this stuff. And I think look, I'm not an anti-vaxxer or anything like that. But to me, I find it so amazing that the left at one time was so cool. The progressives at one time stood for something. The old
school anti-fluoride, and now it's
the ACLU back in the day. I love the ACLU of the 70s and 80s, where they would literally defend Nazis' right to speak, and they would have Jewish and Black attorneys representing them in court. I mean, there was something about that old school ACLU and that old school progressivism that I loved. Sure. There was a vitality there, and they were firm believers in the First Amendment. Oh, hardcore, as hardcore as Republicans are about the Second Amendment and conservatives are, they were about the First Amendment. And I always respected that there was certain values that the left had that I admired from afar. I'm like, I kind of like that ACLU. I like that they stand up for people. And then all of a sudden, now, but you know what? You know what happened was a decision was made in the late 80s by this guy named Tony Colillo, who was a
Wow, you know.
California congressman, and he decided, you know what? We're no longer going to be the party of the working class and the labor unions and the small people. We're going to go to Wall Street and say we want a piece of the action.
Yeah.
And so the very first trial balloon, if you will, of this new idea was Bill Clinton in 1992. Okay. So Bill Clinton gets elected in 1992, and this basically says, Wall Street, we want you in on us too. So now you have corporate control of both parties. And I tell people, I say, listen, you don't understand. If you hate Donald Trump voters, it's because you lack empathy for your fellow human being. Look, I'm not a big Trump guy either, but
Nice.
Bubba in 1992 and 1996, the state that he did best in was West Virginia. Guess what is the state that Donald Trump did best in both elections? West Virginia. Why the shift? I'll tell you what happened. There was this thing called NAFTA that Bill Clinton, a traditional Democrat, would not have supported. The old school Democrats, right? But he said, well, I want to be, I want to go and I want Wall Street to love me. So he pushed through this free trade deal. Okay. See, I'm from the Midwest.
It affects you directly.
Okay. So let me explain something. People like to say Ronald Reagan was anti-unions. Well, maybe he was, but you know what? He didn't decimate the industrial Midwest like Bill Clinton did. Now, what was happening during Reagan's administration was, going into the 70s, 80s, was automation was introduced into the factory thing. So that means you didn't have to have as many workers working in the factory, right? So that's what caused the unions, a lot of layoffs. The people want to blame Reagan on that. No, it was automation that was going on. Okay.
Right.
But basically what happens is we still have a vibrant factory system in the smaller and sleeker, but we do have an industrial Midwest still existed.
And specialists.
You could buy your air conditioner. Your air conditioners came from the Midwest. Your cars came from the Midwest.
Chrysler,
your refrigerators, everything came from the Midwest. Okay.
Apple computers now they're doing, and
everything
Atlanta,
was taking place there. And then he signs this free trade agreement, which on paper really was a great thing. But you know what, homie? Back in the day, you could buy a refrigerator and you don't have to worry about buying a new one for 20 years. Back in the day, washer and dryer that would last you probably for your marriage, or at least maybe you might go through 2 washers and dryers in your entire marriage, assuming you had a long-term marriage, right? Now, guess what? White liberals get to spend $50 less for their washing machine because it's made in China and Mexico, and then they break down after 3 years. And this is the legacy of NAFTA. Is it destroyed our industrial base? And what do we replace it with? Well, guess what? The pharmaceutical companies come in and pour all their stuff, and you get these people whose lives are destroyed because their livelihoods were destroyed and their families were destroyed.
Right.
And then these people, these liberals, these Democrats, and I'm sorry, I'm non-political, but I hate it when people hate. And when these people hate on Donald Trump supporters, they said, do you realize these are traumatized people who were screwed over by Bubba in the 1990s? Okay, that's the legacy of the Clintons. That's the legacy of the Democrat Party betraying its roots and become another corporatist party. And then on top of it, look, I'm not anti-vax or anything. I'm not into conspiracy stuff. But why in the heck are all these lefties promoting all these corporate companies and pharmaceutical companies now? Where is the skepticism that the left used to have about the FBI and the CIA and the corporations and big pharma? They fall in line with all these institutions that defined what being a progressive activist was, is that you push back against those groups. And now you're their PR.
Literally.
And so that's what gets me. I'm like, and again, I'm not political. I'm libertarian. Okay. I mean, I have progressive ideas. I think there's some ideas of progressive. William Jennings Bryan was a great evangelical Christian who was a 3-time nominee of the Democrats, but is also part of the People's Party. He was the Bernie Sanders of his time, and he was an evangelical Christian. He was a progressive, just like Bernie. So
a lot of Christian ideas are like the liberation theology, and even Joseph Smith's United Order are like socialist utopia ideas. Like they are progressive ideas, right?
Yeah. I think that, look, one can approach the Bible and be able to tease out progressive ideas. as well as traditional ideas. I think there's a lot in the scriptures that one can look. There's a lot of value to the Book of Mormon. It does not function as scripture to me, but I'll tell you what, homie. Talking about Zion, let's talk a little bit about Zion. Okay, so I'm going to be giving a presentation, this April and you're going to be there at the Firm Foundation Conference, Rod Meldrum's, and I'm going to be, I guess, the primetime keynote speaker, 7 o'clock on Thursday the 18th. And I'm going to be talking about a Protestant defense of the Book of Mormon, but I'm also going to talk about, and I'm just going to preview it a little bit here. And the preview is, I want to also maybe tie into this talk about, is the restoration ready for Zion? Are we as a people ready for Zion? When I talk about we, all of humanity, but in particular, is the restoration ready for Zion? Because within the idea of Zion is that you have this idea that, of course, Christ will be coming back to Independence, Missouri, establishing a temple. The city of Enoch or the city of Jerusalem, one of those cities, will make their way to Independence, Missouri. And we have this idea of what the future looks like. But the question I have for the restoration is are you ready for it? Are you ready to have it come forth? And if you believe in the restoration, if you believe in Zion, then are you ready to do it? Because I see so much division. I see all these sects. I see all these different groups of Book of Mormon believers and people who believe in Zion, but they're all scattered. And we showed how they're all scattered. And I think you got to get united before he's going to come back. And I'm not going to get too deep. I'm going to explain how that happened, how we can bring unity back to the restoration, which then can model to the rest of the world how disparate the parties that fight each other, even though they have so much in common with each other, can be brought together. They can be an example for the Protestant world and the Catholic world and all the other religions of the world, that perhaps this is how Zion is supposed to happen, is that actually, the people of the Book of Mormon, in many ways, it was revealed to them that they were under condemnation in the 1830s because they were not following the Book of Mormon. They were not taking heed of the message of the Book of Mormon. And so they were actually condemned. And Ezra Taft Benson, who was the president of the church in the 1980s, reiterated this message, saying that we need to get back to the Book of Mormon. That was the reason why he was getting back into that whole area. And I think that really, if we look at the story of the Book of Mormon, we even see the pattern of how Zion is supposed to happen, and that there's a 200-year proto-millennium in the Book of Mormon. And the Book of Mormon tells us how they got there. And I will expand on that a little bit. I got a lot more about that. I want to talk about that. And again, I'm just speaking as an outsider who's trying to use Latter-day Saint scripture, restorationist ideas, and trying to integrate them into an idea that we can actually help bring a people together and bring unity amongst all the believers in Christ, and ultimately unity amongst all the image bearers throughout the entire world, and be ready for the, what do you want to call it, millennium, the return of Christ, Zion, call it whatever you want.
I like that idea of the return of Christ, because Christ is a title, and that idea the Mormons are really into is we're not just crusading serfs who are going to be following lords, we get to be co-heirs with Christ. We're all part of Christ when we do that at that point. And I think that is exactly, and I hear you when you say you're not filled with anger or even like, I hear frustration, but I hear emotion. I hear empathy. I hear that you sympathize, empathize, and you feel for the people that are betraying each other, and you're seeing how they don't have to, because there's so much effort being put into being heard rather than listening, and really there should be at this point, I mean, you look at it, an emergence of the next thing. Zion could be what you call it, but I mean, I don't mind that. I think then they go in the Matrix, they call it Zion. So I think that's we're all right with Zion. It's this idea of the future, a perfect place, maybe where we're closer to what we've defined in the past as heaven, right? Omnipotence, knowing all things, immortality. If we can end suffering, do you think, like with transhumanism and futurism, are these things that you see as part of the quest for making the world a better place, or are they dangerous?
So I've had some Mormon transhumanists come on my program. Lincoln is one of them, actually, and so I've had them on, and I explore these topics. There's also Christian transhumanism. There's actually a broader Christian transhumanist movement, and there's a Mormon transhumanist movement. And my one takeaway, because actually my mom made a really good point that the problem is she thinks that transhumanism might be satanic, and she points out to the Book of Revelation where there's a part where basically the people want to die and they can't because they've received immortality, and she seems to think
Right.
that the transhumanists, or that those were people that became immortal via transhumanism. It's an interesting theory. But I also think it's really important that Christians and people of faith need to be at the table when we're talking about transhumanism. Christian values need to be implemented here, because if we are going to take that next step and actually do human-caused immortality, if this is how humanity is to achieve immortality, Christians better be in that room having that conversation. Because if we're not part of that conversation, if we opt out of it, I think what happens is I'm concerned that humanity risks becoming the Borg.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that if we're going to have that conversation, and actually in theory, if this were to absolutely we're able to happen, we have to have some Christian values, some ethical principles as part of this, because if we don't, I do fear for the future of humanity that if we achieve immorality here in this physical space, in this material universe, what are the consequences? Is this what God wanted, or have we maybe gone a different direction with another force that has another plan for humanity? And so we have to be really careful that we discern as we enter the future. Look, my mom was saying, like I was talking about to her about talking to the time travelers. See, well, when my mom was growing up, she said the idea that somebody would walk on the moon would be an absolute impossibility. That's as ridiculous as time travel. Well, now we got AI, we got all this other stuff happening, and we're making all these scientific breakthroughs, and we don't know where this is going. We don't. I mean,
Right.
I do, in some sense. I do, like I did tell you, I do feel sometimes I'm able to take a glimpse of Zion and look at the
You
future.
seem kind of Yoda, yeah.
Yeah, and
it's not always clear, but that's our own fault,
Yeah. Well, we all look through a glass darkly,
Yeah.
and that's even looking back and also looking forward. And so, and honestly, there's, I don't poo-poo the weirdness of this universe and the physics that would possibly have the idea of time travel. And I'll tell you, I just have these weird things that happen to me now and then that I can't explain.
Right.
And in my mind, the way I process this information is I would say this is providence, right? This is the providential hand of God, right, on this endeavor. But then I think, is this weird physics? Is this all part of the material universe that we just don't understand? Then we just call it God? I don't know. But I'm just saying there's just too many. There are times when I pick up a random book about this obscure author from this obscure sect in Mormonism, and I'm reading the book, and then 5 minutes later I get a ding on my phone from one of those people from that group saying, "Hey, have you ever read any of his books? His name."
Yeah.
Right. Then I have another situation where I'm literally showing the Mormon missionaries this edition of the Book of Mormon. All right, I take them out for breakfast. So I take the Mormons out for breakfast or dinner all the time. The Mormon missionaries,
awesome.
especially when a new one comes in here. And this one was sent to me, and this is the verse. This is page 115 in the Book of Mormon. It says, "And because my words shall henceforth, many of the Gentiles shall say, a Bible, we have got a Bible, and there cannot be any more Bible." Okay. So I'm talking to the Mormon missionaries, and I'm actually talking to them, and I said, I kind of actually interrupt one of the missionaries. And I even thought to myself, boy, that was kind of rude. But I said, listen, I want you to, I want to read this verse to you. So I read them the verse. And now I swear to you, not more than 2 seconds after I read that verse, I get a notification on my phone, and I look, and I don't always get notifications every time somebody leaves a comment on YouTube, but I got this notification, and there was this quote on this video, a random video. It was that Bible verse, that verse from the Book of Mormon, verbatim. What I just read the Mormon missionaries. I went to the missionaries and said, "Look, guys, look what I just got," and their eyes got real big.
Wow.
Well, what was that?
I mean, yeah, like the synchronicity is something that a lot of people want to dismiss miracle or divine providence as terms, but people are very comfortable with glitch or synchronicity or the fact that quantum entanglement. For some reason, quantum entanglement's easier for people to handle than divine providence, I guess. But there seems to be like some connection and people picking up on thoughts that I think that's really huge. And time travel, even just thinking about how practically it's amazing that you have children, they have children, and somehow part of you still exists in the future. And from what we understand about quantum entanglement, there's probably a connection from the very most future point to the very past point, in the same way that there's something from the very past point to the very future point. So, I mean, there probably are connections that we're finding with biology that tie together time. We'll do a whole episode on this at some point more, I think, but we should talk about time travel from the perspective of what is space-time, because like look at Dr. Nima Arkani Hamed, who's one of the most renowned physicists in the world, and all the effort that's been made since he discovered the pentaquark and predicted a number of subatomic particles. But he also said, if we find the pentaquark, it's going to prove that time doesn't really exist, that what we're experiencing as time is a sort of illusion or dimensional illusion that humans and biology are using. But we're going to have to replace time itself. Space and time are going to be some other symmetry. And so symmetry starts to emerge as a concept, and we start seeing symmetry as a very important thing. In fact, Neoplatonists obsess over this idea, like, what is real? Like, show me a straight ruler. You don't have one, but you have this idea of a straight line. It's actually a divine principle, right? Like the number 4. What's the number? What is that? You can find 4 things, but what is 4? These are divine principles. What is love? What is justice? And so all of a sudden, it seems like divine principles, you get why they're called divine. They're far more interesting and more perfect than anything in material nature. But all of material nature is trying to follow divine principles in symmetry. So you'll find patterns, you'll find synchronicities, you'll find if something works, it's repeated. You'll find something that, the fact that crabification. Have you heard about this? Where like thousands of different kinds of species evolve into crabs randomly in different parts of the world just because it works, So I find I think that we're going to see that time travel in and of itself is probably just like presence and being connected. And it has a lot to do with communication and empathy and being able to be aware of what's happening in other spaces. Because even on a level of superficial, right? Yesterday when Kwaku was on, we talked about like flat earth and stuff. And it really comes back to electric universe. Is it really one thing or the other? It's probably all this electric universe. So we're experiencing connections between the moments because we are probably all the energy taking shape as this moment or that moment or the next moment. And we probably can reality shift. It seems crazy, but have you ever been driving somewhere and you're going to be late and somehow you arrive on time because you've been praying about it? I mean, I've had that happen to me way too many times. I don't know. It seems like that's just a minor miracle, but time dilation is already something interesting. And the idea that we have mixed memories, on one hand, this could be a conspiracy theory, like the Berenstain Bear. Maybe they're changing the book titles on purpose. Maybe people are just misremembering it. But on the level of we're living in a postmodernist world where people don't experience reality as much. They live on the internet now. Yeah. So you have billions of people that their reality is like the moon landing. Did it happen? Well, if your mom saw it, isn't that more important? Like, does it, like the idea of the conspiracy theory there, it's like September 11th, like what happened afterwards and all of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and things that had nothing to do ostensibly with this thing. These butterfly effects matter. So it's worth studying them. I think for the same reason you say, we should be careful with, like Joseph Smith, the idea, like whether he's a pious fraud or not a fraud at all. It's like the effects are so huge. You see millions of people are affected by it. So time travel, I think, yes, on one hand, we could say that these things sound silly because we're not able to do them perfectly yet. But because of the way time works, the fact that we're connected from the past to the future, and we're living in a world where we're seeing hypotheticals become real. Like AI is a great example. 10 years ago, people thought it was, a sci-fi movie. And now everybody is directly connected to AI. Everyone is talking to AI. It just took less than a year, really. Yeah. So I think we're going to be living in a world very soon where it'll be better just to anticipate everything's possible and to be, careful about that. And
Yeah.
I think that's again why, like, having Christian values and transhumanism, like you said, having values at all, having divine principles at all in any of our scientific pursuits is going to be important.
Absolutely. I think it's vital to this, if in any ways, probably to the survival of humanity. I think that God, we are image bearers. We're all created in his image. And he gives us a lot of gifts and a lot of potential. And I grapple with the idea of, is everything etched in stone? Like, are we predetermined to follow something? And is everything going to happen a certain way? Or is it open where we have the options to go in different directions? And in that we're truly free. And I think it's hard for me to grapple with that because I was also raised like as a Calvinist. So we kind of almost drill in.
Yeah, right.
Right. And now I'm
actually Calvinists might be just as interested in time travel for the opposite reasons. I feel like you're just like, I can't stop it. I don't know.
Yeah, really. That's a great point. But yeah, I just think it's really important that we have these conversations. I actually got some flack for posting a short about, I'm meeting with a Mormon time traveler. A few people pushed back on it. I'm like, listen,
we haven't even scratched the surface.
We haven't scratched the surface, but this is the key thing. You know what? We live in a world in which we are pitted against each other.
Right.
And everybody pits themselves against. I experience it firsthand every day where people who hate me because I'm an evangelical who's friendly to Latter-day Saints. And I'm not supposed to do that because I'm the baddie. You guys are the enemy.
How dare you love your neighbor? What's wrong with you?
So literally we are forced into these tribes and camps. And I'm like, you know what? You don't have to stay in your tribe. You don't have to think your tribe is the be all end all. I come from the evangelical tribe. But you know what I'm doing is I'm blowing up silos, tearing down walls, and building bridges, and getting people talking to each other who've never talked to each other before. And I think that's my divine calling, to get people to talk to each other and to be a peacemaker and be a bridge builder. And, with my YouTube channel, Mormon Book Reviews, I really feel it hasn't even been 3 years yet. And I really feel that it's had a real major impact in this world. I don't know, Andres, do you think that my channel is having an impact?
Yeah, totally. I'm surprised that your channel's not much larger subscription count. Everybody watching this, please take the time to subscribe to Steven's channel, Mormon Book Reviews, because he's got like 40,000, 100,000, 60,000 views on this and that video. I don't know why you didn't all subscribe. Was it because you guys, is it literally because of what he just said? Is it because you guys felt guilty that he's not being a member of your church?
I think what it is that partly is that in the space I occupy, I'm the only Mormon YouTube podcast guy. Like everybody else is either ex-Mormon and kind of anti-Mormon, or TBM or True Blue Mormon, and everything's faithful.
There's no latter curious. Yeah.
And so for me, I'm the only one that occupies this space. Well, I think I could get really big if I were to choose a lane. I'm going to go full in anti, or I'm going to go full in.
You sound a lot like me. If I could just choose a lane, yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like.
But I don't. I like that space that I occupy because I'm not beholden to any group, any institution. Nobody has any editorial control. I don't have to worry about, I don't want to upset people at the church headquarters, or I don't want to upset people in the ex-Mormon Reddit, right? It's the same thing. I'm like, no, I can just go flat and I have total freedom to do this channel and have talk to a Mormon time traveler and not be afraid to, I got to worry about this person. No, then when people go to me and say, you shouldn't platform that person, I'm like, guess who I'm going to be inviting onto my program.
That's what's going to happen now.
Yeah. And guess what? I'm going to keep on having them back on. Because nobody's going to program my program. I have total editorial freedom. It's a beautiful space. So yeah, it would be great to have 10 times the subscribers that I do. But I'm grateful, first of all, that it's been a steady, sustained growth. And
people who love you, right? People.
And it hasn't overwhelmed me. Like I've been able to. It hasn't got to the point where I need to hire people, and I have to. I can still be in touch. I can still literally, mentor a 19-year-old college freshman on a Zoom call for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon. I'm still able to do that kind of thing. Or literally I have a Latter-day Saint message me saying, Steve, I'm about ready to commit suicide. And I spend 30 minutes talking them down. Now, this is another synchronicity thing that's really weird. So I'm heading to go to the Bickerton night service on a Saturday night. Those are the Pentecostal Mormons, by the way, the Church of Jesus Christ. Okay, and they're
And
based
you were
in,
just checking them all out. That's awesome.
yeah, I check them all out. I worship with the Book of Mormon believing Pentecostals, the Church of Jesus Christ. So I'm heading to a special Saturday night preaching service they're having, and you know, it was weird because I was planning on taking guests with me, and I kept on thinking, no, I'm not supposed to take any guests, and I couldn't understand because I was thinking maybe I could invite this person, but I'm like, no, I'm supposed to drive alone. Next thing you know, I'm in line at the toll booth to cross the Sunshine Skyway Bridge that goes over Tampa Bay, and there's a traffic jam. And I'm like, oh shoot, I'm going to be late for this thing. Like, I mean, I left in plenty of time. And then I'm actually talking to another YouTuber on the phone, and I get this message from this Latter-day Saint saying, Steve, I need your help. I'm basically I'm going to end my life right now. So I get off. I read the first message that he needed help. And then I see the second message saying that, you know, he's going to off himself. So I'm in this traffic jam going up this bridge, which, by the way, this bridge is like the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. This bridge is the place that people go to commit suicide. So I'm going up this bridge very slowly because it's a traffic jam, because there was an accident where it closed the one lane. And I spent 30 minutes talking him down from a suicide attempt while I'm crossing over a bridge slowly, thinking of all the people that had committed suicide jumping off from this bridge. That wasn't lost on me. And so after 30 minutes, and then I've done follow-up. He's doing better. He's only like 22, 23 years old. He's just a kid. And I got off that phone and I was just like, what just happened? I wasn't prepared for that. I don't have the degrees and the licensing to do this, but I was able to do it. And there's a reason why I was the only one in that car. I intended on taking guests because that call had to be done one-on-one with him. I had to leave the house at the time I did, so I would slowly climb up that bridge so I'm not distracted. You know, I can talk to him and talk him down from the suicide in a spot that people commit suicide from all the time. And then I remember telling and then I just had to process that over the course of a couple of days. And one of my neighbors goes to me and says, "You must have felt really good doing that." I said, "No, I didn't feel good." And he says, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I know that's not going to be the last time I'm going to get that phone call." So for me, it really is a solemn thing that I'm doing with my channel that literally, and I do get emails and letters, messages from people all the time saying that I really helped them through a dark time. I was contemplating atheism, but you've given me hope to believe. So that's, in one sense, it's become a ministry to help people who've then been hurt, in many cases by organized religion. And by people saying, using God's name, you know, in doing bad things to people using God's name, in God's name.
And I like the idea of synchronicity in that too, because it's like, if you remember that show Quantum Leap, it's kind of like, you're like, you know, we're all like this at certain moments in life, but it feels like we're leaped into circumstances.
Yeah, that was
crazy moments. You're like, oh, I'm on a bridge right now. Okay. Like basically I like that also because you can imagine any past you have as just imprinted, like you are you right now, and you've got a backstory, but like you're not the same you as yesterday that has a backstory as well. So all of a sudden it's a brand new you driving towards this destiny, right? And you have this whole backstory that's created. You're just put into that circumstance. It's almost like anything before it doesn't matter, because all of a sudden now you're going to save someone's life. I mean, and life is the most important thing. It's the thing that brings, you know, the only thing that you can really prove that we're doing, I think, is if you're saying you're going to save the future. It's like, if you have life and you sustain life, it will produce more life. It's the closest thing you have to being able to ensure that there is somebody in the future that will be there for you. I think that's the big part of it.
And, you know, is this the divine providential thing? Is this part of who we are as image bearers of God, that we have the spark of the divine within us? And are we maybe not tapping into the full potentiality as a species, partly because we're too busy having these screens in front of us all the time? And now they want to put goggles over us. And yeah.
I have a good picture though of a bunch of people on a train, or I think on a train, and they're all holding newspapers in front of their faces. It was 100 some odd years ago, and so
Yeah, so it's the same thing.
it's important to remember. Yeah, we don't we change, but I don't know if we change as much as we'd like to believe. You know, and I think we're at that point. Might
And
be at that point where we.
I do think we're manipulated more than we realize too. I think that
Yeah.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but let's not doubt that there's a lot of manipulation that goes on all the time from our governments, all different governments, from different corporations, and just folks, you got to unplug yourself from that world now and then, and be self-reflective, and meditate, and take deep breaths, and have a prayer life, have a spiritual side, because that's what puts us in touch with our ancestors from the distant past, is that common humanity that we have, but also the divine spark that we can actually almost date it. The divine spark of humanity, when we became image bearers, was the moment when we start seeing that our ancestors started burying their dead. And then they would start maybe burying things, objects to them that were important to them, or that would be helpful to them in the afterlife. And then Margaret Mead said, we became human when we found the first human remains, the oldest human remains that had broken hip bones. In other words, they didn't leave them back because they were selfless, and they picked up that person and they carried them. And see, that's the divine spark right there. That's the connection that we need to have, is to those people who didn't have all the distractions that we have, but realize the divine potentiality of humanity doing those burial rites, and that there was something bigger than themselves.
That is so huge. That is the beginning of it all. I want to end with one last thing. I harped on this yesterday a bit, but I think it's really cool. As a evangelical, this symbol, I'm sure, ichthys, the Jesus fish is pretty sweet. Some people laugh about it. I love the Jesus fish. I'm a huge fan. Yeah. I think it's sweet. It's also really similar to a rune, the Othala rune, which is the symbol for prosperity. Unfortunately, it's been co-opted by some negative circle. But the peace sign, it's like similar kind of idea. This idea of prosperity, and has to do with being a prince, or nobility, being a co-heir of Christ. Like, these are all tied together like duty. But the fish is only one version of the ichthys, right? The ichthys wheel. Have you seen the ichthys wheel before?
I've seen that. I didn't know that was tied in with that. Okay, let's.
Yeah. So if you take an IXOYE and you superimpose them on each other, you get this IXOYE, right? So it's actually, if you go back, it was the more common symbol than the fish. Apparently, this is all over the place, and it looks like Jesus in his own life more commonly drew the ichthys as this 8-spoked wheel that is the symbol here, right? Okay. And so you find it more and more. What I find interesting is it's very similar to the Dharma chakra, right? Which is the symbol of the 8-spoked wheel, which is used by all of the ancient antediluvian religions before the flood, right? Okay. This is kind of the universal symbol. So I find that really interesting. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that ichthys 8-pointed wheel, Dharma chakra united.
I think that, I believe that in one sense, the scriptures and the creation all point to Christ. So if we're going to see these commonalities of symbols, I think that it's embedded in us that, look, Jesus is different than, I think, any other faith leader or religion. There's something that resonates with him that, unlike all the religions. And I think that Jesus is something that is really, in one sense, our universal savior. I think there's this universalism to Jesus that you don't find in a lot of religions. Some religions, it's your religion, that's your religion because that's your ethnic group, or any number of different things, whether it's geography or where you live or your ethnicity. And Jesus kind of goes and just blows up the whole thing and creates a path for all of humanity to be able to have a relationship with the divine. And I think that sometimes if you look at the ancient symbolology, it is anticipating a savior of humanity. And I think that that's kind of how I would look at it. So that's just me on the fly there, giving my interpretation, if you don't mind. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's cool. Let me also say, like, thank you again for doing an interesting conversation. I hope that we have the chance to do another one soon, because I'd love to talk more about time travel and all kinds of weird stuff. But you had so many really deep and interesting things to say. I'm glad that we got to be on. That was a wonderful conversation.
I didn't know what I was going to bring to the table today, but I appreciate this, and thank you. And thank you for promoting my channel, Mormon Book Reviews.
Yeah, I hope that everyone checks it out. I actually really enjoy this channel. I enjoy specific things, but these are like really good conversations with really unique and really fascinating people. You've done some really good work here. And I wasn't aware how loving and empathetic and open-minded you were until I'd seen your videos myself. So I just want to say, everyone, you should check things out. Never judge a Mormon book review by its cover.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, dude. And check out my channel, Mormon Book Reviews. I also have another YouTube channel called Utah Interfaith Forum, where we're going to have conversations with people from the interfaith world, which I'm really excited about. As a matter of fact, I take my first episode today about that. Yep, Utah Interfaith Forum. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate it. And that's a new channel I'm launching to have adult conversations of people from different faith traditions and see where we can find the commonality and embrace the idea that we are all image bearers.
That's a freaking sweet goal right there. All right, I'm for it. Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, man. I'll see you next time. And yeah, and everybody, for watching on Steven's channel, you can check out Xirtus, Xirtus.com, or my YouTube channel. I'll just really quickly post.
And I'll probably post this on my channel at some point. And I think we got to have you on Mormon Book Reviews, because I think I have a lot of questions I want to ask you.
Yeah, it'll be cool. All right. Well, let me say one more time, God bless you, and love to your mother, and peace be with you. All right.
Same to you.
Ciao.
God bless.
Next up, call up, let's go Saints. Guided by faith where the universe paints. Celestial Saints and a cosmic grace.